Grace and peace to you from Jesus Christ, who chose life for us, so we might live for others. Amen. Well, friends, before sitting down to reflect on this sermon on Thursday, I sat down to read the Thursday Patriot News. Yes, a physical newspaper is delivered to my home 3 times a week. That might come as a surprise to some of you. And it is my daily, or weekly rather, routine to read it from cover to cover. But I've been noticing lately, and maybe you have too, that it's really full of a lot of bad news, right? A few weeks ago, 2 communities were devastated by gun violence in California. We're consistently inundated with news of mass shootings these days. Then we heard of a man named Tyree Nichols who was senselessly beaten while he was just trying to get home, and he didn't make it home to his mother. Closer to home, we saw people evicted from their homes in the middle of winter, people left with no shelter. And just this week on Monday, we saw how violent the earth can be as we watched videos of buildings toppling in Turkey and Syria. The death toll of that earthquake is both astronomical and heartbreaking. Friends, our world is full of bad news. Or to use the words from Deuteronomy, our world is full of death and adversity, death and evil. And it can feel overwhelming sometimes, right? Like, what can we do as individuals about it? What impact can we make when it seems like there's so much going on around us? There are, of course, also people who just don't want to do anything about it because the status quo is fine. The death and the evil is just far enough away that there's no motivation to do anything about it. Well, in our story for today from Deuteronomy, Moses, that famous leader who brought God's people out of Egypt, is speaking. And this is his farewell speech, or better yet, his farewell sermon to God's people who have been wandering in the desert for so long. And they are on the cusp of entering the promised land that God was going to give them. Now, Moses knows that he doesn't have a whole lot of time left with these folks, so he decides to use it to teach them and to remind them of who God is and what God calls them to. We just heard Moses call the Israelites to life. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him, and holding fast to him. We heard that choosing life means loving God, walking in God's ways, keeping God's commandments, and maintaining faith in God. Now, at first glance, it seems like this life is only for them, for the Israelites. It kind of seems like Moses is saying, if you do this, you will get that. Or he's saying, choose life, and good things will happen to you. This is one of those places where other Christians get the prosperity gospel. Now, we as Lutherans don't hold to this idea, because if we dig just a little deeper here, we see that this is a call to share life with others. walking in God's ways and keeping God's commandments, what we might think of and call the law, really does mean life for others, not just life for the Israelites. Because after all, God's law is about life. It tells them and it tells us where and how life can be found. It taught the Israelites and it teaches us how to build a community that promotes life for all people. Sometimes we think that the law is opposite from the gospel, the good news. Well, I'm going to stand up here and tell you that it is not. These two things go hand in hand. Law and gospel work together because both want to promote life for all people and they want to give life to all people. And friends, we also know that we've already received life from God. God has given us life in and through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's a guaranteed promise from God. That we have been freed and then given this awesome opportunity to make sure that others experience life as well. So we don't just choose to live for ourselves. We're called to live for others as Jesus lived, died, and rose for us. So my questions for you this week are: how do you share life with others? How are you living for others so they too experience life and liberation in Jesus? Well, you might consider giving to those who experienced that earthquake in Turkey and in Syria. Our friends at Lutheran World Relief are doing work on the ground addressing what is going on there. You could advocate for those who might not be able to advocate for themselves. You could use your voice to call out the wrongs and injustices. You could take action. Use those gifts that God has given you to serve others. You could feed the hungry, provide housing for the unhoused. Friends, our job is to counteract all that bad news that is around us. We're called to be proclaimers of good news. We're called to embody the good news, to be the good news for other people. We cannot live just for ourselves. That's not the life Jesus has called us to. When he said, "Follow me," he meant it. Jesus never lived for himself. Again and again, he chose to live for others. And our Bible is full of those stories. He also chose to die for others. So this year, as we strive to follow Jesus, we also strive to impact lives. When we choose to live for others, lives will be changed, lives will be impacted, and that's how life can and will be experienced for all people. Amen.